Good afternoon, gamers, and welcome to episode 30 of Games with Dave. This afternoon, joining me all the way from Portugal is Brazilian game designer Cezar Capacle. Cezar is currently running a very cool campaign on Crowdfunder for his sci-fi zine, Derelict Delvers. It's an RPG that can be played either with solo or with a group, if I understood correctly, and without a GM. Welcome to the show, Cezar. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And since now we're recording, I just have to say thank you so much for the work you're doing during this ZineQuest. I mean, 30 interviews is not easy, and helping support indie creators the way you're doing, kudos to you. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. It has been so much fun doing these, as we were talking about before this. I think I underestimated the work that was going to go into making all these interviews, between the research, setting them up, and then doing them. But I have had so much fun and made so many new friends, present company included, that this has just been an absolute blast, and I can't wait until the next Zine Quest already to do it again. So,
Excellent.
what initially got you into role-playing games?
Well, that was almost 30 years ago. And I think I was 12 at the time. A friend of mine invited me to go over to another friend's place, and they said, "Oh, let's play a game." And I thought it was going to be a board game. Back in Brazil, up until the 80s, we didn't have much access to role-playing games, at least not in my city. It was a tiny city on the countryside, and they were very expensive. But this friend of ours, he got a copy of the first quest, which was the introductory module to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, if I'm not mistaken, that came with ready-made characters with illustrations, and it included a CD with the audio. Do you remember that? I don't know if you got this.
I
Uh,
don't remember a CD, but
Yeah, there was a CD with actors actually narrating parts of the dungeon delving and everything up until the point that the characters had to make a decision. So I went to this place and they started playing this, and they handed the characters to us. And this friend of ours that was the GM, he actually draw some of the monsters. And I looked at all of that and I said, wow, this is amazing. As a kid, I always liked to, come up with my own stories in my head, draw those fantasy maps. I can't draw really, but as a kid, all kids draw. And I would come up with those world building facts about those islands and pirates and everything. And I sat there and had the experience to mix gaming, which I loved, like dice and stuff, with the experience of coming up with a story as we played. So I was hooked from the very beginning. And it would be another 2 or 3 years before I had saved enough money to buy my first. It wasn't even a book; it was a magazine that had a Brazilian system embedded in it, and I started reading it frantically. And yeah, that was fascinating to me from the get-go. The idea of experiencing stories through gameplay, and never stopped. I lie, I stopped during college. I had a hard time finding groups, so I had a hiatus of about 5, 6 years, and then I returned after that. Yeah.
awesome. And it was the same way for me. I was a little kid and I got hooked. I ended up taking about 14 years off from got back into
Really?
it about 5, maybe 6 years ago, when a group of my friends needed a GM, and they're like, "Yeah, can you be our dungeon master?" And I'm like, I don't know." And then they asked me
Maybe.
again, and I was just like, "Oh, okay." And Yeah, and the rest is history, as they say.
Exactly, exactly that.
So how did you break into the RPG industry?
Well, I think for a lot of people in the industry, it starts with this progression of you're a player, then you're a GM, then you kind of make a house rule, then you make a little hack to adapt to a different setting. And when you see it, you have created a proto game of sorts. That happened to me. The first time I was invited to run the AD&D, I just, you know, I think most of my game design philosophy comes from my limitations, and which inform the way I approach game design. So the books of AD&D, they were kind of too much for me to grok. So I said, well, that could be a little different if we simplify this and take that and try this. Let's see what happens. It was a disaster. I completely destroyed the game, and but that never left me. The idea that I could come up with a set of rules that I could present to my friends, and that would inform the way we approached this experience of sharing a story together. And that was so fascinating. And we kept playing up until the point we got to D&D 4th edition, which was fun as a very combat focused implementation. It was good for playing online. It was the first time we played online, so it worked. But we had some frustrations with it, mainly regarding not having partial success and the feeling that disconnection that sometimes we feel when we play D&D from what it sells as an experience and what we actually live as an experience on the table. Besides what the GM brings to the table, the stories and the engagement and the things we remember, those are fine. But that high paced action adventure and feeling that you are powerful and you can do things and influence the story, and then sometimes you're like 1 hour and a half on the same combat and you're running low on your d20 and you're like an awesome barbarian and you can't just hit that goblin in front of you. What's wrong with that? So this disconnection from what they sold and the actual experience we had caused some frustration that made me investigate other styles of play. And that led me to the more narrative side of RPGs. I discovered Fate and its siblings. And I said, oh, wow, people are hacking this game and creating their own versions of it. I think I can give it a try. And so that was, I think, 2016, if I'm not mistaken. I decided to give it a go, and I wrote a little game, and I formatted it to be read at a smartphone, so you could have like 50 pages on a PDF that you could read on a smartphone. I published it. There was some good reception. I still sell. It's pay what you want, so most people just get it for free. But there are downloads up to until this day of this game, and I could never stop. So but recently, I mean 2020, I quit my job, my previous job, and decided to give it a go at a full-time game design career. And for the last 2 years, I've been doing this, and I published more than 20 games since.
Or 20 seems to be the magic number for the two of us with everything. You've
Really?
published 20 games. I did 20 interviews this month. And
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
Lucas, I'm hoping I get the last name right in the chat. Lucas Peyoto said, hello, Cezar, hugs from Brazil.
Lucas, my good friend, awesome designer as well. He has a website where he automates some tables, content generators for solo RPGs, some oracles and stuff. Great guy.
Awesome. How bad did I do on his last name?
It's actually Peixoto.
Peixoto.
Yeah.
All right. I apologize for butchering your last name, Lucas.
Don't worry. X in Portuguese, they have like 3 different pronunciations. It can be sh, z, or x, so you're fine.
Oh boy, I'll get it right. So, getting into your game Derelict Delvers, which you have
Okay.
on Crowdfunder now, could you give, without giving too much away, could you give a brief synopsis of the game for folks out there that may not have heard of it yet?
Of course, yeah. So Derelict Delvers is, simply put, it's a dungeon crawling in space with a twist. So the provocation that I had in my mind that I always talk about in my interviews is my design is what if based. So I have this what ifs that keep floating in my mind, and sometimes they collide, and that becomes a game. In this case, was what if Star Trek went terribly wrong? So humanity achieved space travel. They went to space into diplomatic missions, but they were not welcomed. They were received with hostile aliens that killed everything, destroyed everything. Everything that is left are the derelicts of this mission. So the ones that survived, those delvers, which are the player characters, now have to go into those space stations and spaceships that are abandoned and overrun by hostile aliens and try to scavenge for what is left there and make a profit while they are at it. So that was the main provocation, the main what if that drove me to investigate this game. And actually that combined with the fact that my good friend, another great Brazilian game designer, Igor Moreno, had just released the SRD for his game called That Dungeon Game with Dragons and Stuff. That's the actual name of the game. And he released the SRD in Portuguese. And it's a kind of a DIY D&D. You make your own classes, your own races, your own powers, your own magic items, your own monsters, and you go for a classic dungeon delving experience. And I'd never done a dungeon delving game before. So that kind of looked like the perfect fit for the moment. And then I said, well, you know what? I'll give this a go, and I'll combine these two things and see what happens. And there you go. That's the game.
Very cool. It looks like so much fun. And what one thing that really intrigued me was the fact that you could play the game solo or as a group. So
That's correct.
how does that what's the word I'm looking for? How does that dynamic work that you can have either a solo game or a group game?
Yeah, right. So I think I've been navigating since I started professionally going through game design. I've been navigating through the GMless side of uh, game design, especially because I believe there's merit into looking at your games through a GMless lens. What I mean by that is when you try to remove the idea that there will be an intelligent being with a baggage and experience ready to fill in the blanks of the things you didn't solve in the mechanics of your game, you tend to get some shortcuts and you tend to be more relapse in some parts, I think. Like, oh, okay, the GM will decide. The GM decides, the GM decides, and so on and so forth. When you start from a GMless perspective, you have to assume that everyone that's playing there needs to rely on the rules that you had on your book to play the game entirely without resorting to their previous experience, their baggage, to anyone else that holds this position of a higher knowledge or experience in the game. So that fascinated me from the game design perspective. And I've been developing games like that since then. And what I tried to do with this game was to have the possibility to codify the roles that usually a game master has. So I created a series of meta roles that go beyond your character. So you as a player, you create your character, but then you have to pick a meta role. There are 6 of them. So if you're playing in a smaller group, you divide, and some people will have more than a meta role. But those meta roles are responsible for things like, oh, someone will take care of the monsters, someone will take care of designing the room and updating the map, someone will take care of rulings or clarifying rules, someone will take care of spicing things up with descriptions and weaving together the random elements that they roll on tables to create a sort of lore for the game they're playing, so on and so forth. So when you play as a group, you kind of spread those meta roles around, and everyone is partially responsible for creating this world. And but the game doesn't break if you play it by yourself. You're just responsible for all 6 meta roles, as you usually are when you're playing solo games. And since you are responsible for creating the monsters and the dangers you're going to face, you just tone it down a little bit because you're going to be alone, and you're going to have fun just as the same.
It sounds fun. And I really like how, as a group, it's a very collaborative game building experience.
It certainly is,
It
yeah.
seems like it would really enrich the experience of playing the game that way. And that's
Yeah.
very cool. So I was looking through the book, and one of the other things, can you explain how character creation works?
Right. Yeah, that maybe changed a little bit from the demo to now, but I simplified it. It's quite simple, actually. You have 3 stats. They're called frame, focus, and flare. I love myself an alliteration, so I try to do it. Frame represents all the physical stuff. Focus is mental stuff, as well as accuracy and precision. And flare is the attribute you use to use your powers. They're actually called facets. The facets of your character are frame, focus, and flare. So you simply assign a D8, a D10, and a D12 for these 3 facets. And then you come up with your powers. Powers, in a broad sense, these can be weapons, gadgets, items, companions, special trainings or skills, moves that you know, even maybe some sort of void magic or mystic thing that happened while you're traversing the galaxy. So there is space for you to go weird on the sci-fi direction, or just keep on more on the trooper and military side of it as well. And those powers they don't need to have no stats attached to it, no numbers, no anything, because when you use them, you decide the effect you want to give, and that will inform the difficulty for your roll. So they are kind of flexible in a way. After that, you pick the meta roles that I mentioned before, distribute among the players, and you're pretty much done. A name, and that's it.
Wow, that's fast.
It is.
To go back a little bit, you had mentioned assigning either a D8, a D10, or a D12 to the facets. How do you decide which one? Can you assign a D12 to all 3 if you wanted to, or do you assign one of each?
It's one of each, that's for sure. And I think the best way to approach is what they allow you to do. So frame is going to be used on hand-to-hand combat and all other physical skills and tasks. Focus, ranged combat, so if you want to be a shooter or stuff like that. And also deciphering things, reasoning, and puzzles and stuff like that. And flare, if you want to rely more on your powers, on the things you carry with you, the gadgets and trainings and stuff. So the one that you're more invested in, I would suggest you go with the D12 because you have more chance to succeed. And the one you're least interested in, you assign a D8. But the game is geared towards success, or at least partial success, because I want players to feel that their characters are competent. So they're not squishy. it's hard to die, but the things that happen beyond dying, they are actually worse, in my opinion, and we can talk about that later. But anyway, the even with a D8, you will have a pretty good margin of success on your tasks most of the time, unless you have a die curse, which is my case, for
Yeah.
example.
I'm with you there. So there are now it's starting to click a little bit more because I was thinking you could assign a D12 to all three, and I was incorrect. So with the checks, I'm assuming if one is assigned to focus, you'd use the D12 for that check.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah, you use the die that you're assigned to roll for that check in particular.
Gotcha. Because I was picturing my players going, "Oh, I've got a D12 in everything." And
Yeah, that would be easy.
so another thing that I thought was really, really cool, being as busy as I am all the time, is that this is a zero prep game,
It is.
which a lot like I think is absolutely fantastic. Can you elaborate on that, I guess, would be of what zero prep means for folks that may have never experienced that before?
Right. Yeah. And I don't say zero prep lightly, because I believe that's a word that's we aim for, but not all the time we deliver. We game designers, I mean, everybody wants their game to be like low prep, or mostly at least. Of course, if you put out a 400-page book, everybody knows it's not low prep. But even with smaller books, sometimes there are technicalities that needed to be discussed previously. But what I mean by zero prep when I say that in my games is that I have a clear procedure for playing, especially when it's a GMless game that you don't have someone to rely on to tell you what's next. And you can't have the chance to be around the table and all players are looking at each other and okay, now what? So when you have a GMless game, you have to have this procedure clearly laid out. So what I try to do is, after I explain the basic mechanics, so this is how you roll dice, this is how you create your character. Now this is how you play the game. Number one, create a mission. How do you create? Roll table X and Y. Number two, create a room. The person responsible for the room, you roll on table X and Y and draw. The person responsible for X will do blah, blah, blah. It's like a recipe, and it's a loop. After you get to the end of this loop, you start back from the beginning and you just repeat. So you can crack the book open at the how to play part of it, and you follow it step by step. It's some people may find, if they are not used to this kind of experience, they may find it a little too rigid. Oh, it's turning into a board game. You can do anything in a RPG. This is kind of limiting the experience, but I assure you, it's the opposite. For me, the what is limiting the experience is when you get stuck. And you get stuck and don't know what to do. The rules don't help you, and you say, I don't know, maybe we just go home, or we leave this spaceship. What we do next? So when you have this, you can rest assured that the game will provide the next step for you. So then you can immerse yourself in the scene and do what you got to do without worrying if the game will go in the right direction, because the procedure is clearly laid out. So when we finish the step, we just go to the book. Okay, what's next? Oh, okay, loot. Okay, all right. And now, okay, now we rest. Let's create another room. And then you go. So I think my hope is, and I always strive to achieve this in my games, is to make instructions very precise, so that those gaps of people looking around, especially with a GMless game, don't happen as often.
I think you've really nailed it from what I've seen in the demo book of how just it seems to flow really well through those steps.
Thank you.
And
Appreciate that.
I love the tables and how you roll for virtually everything in the game, from monsters to the room, and
Yeah.
there's it's so cool.
Yeah,
But
I gotta say for backers and people thinking of backing, I've now updated the game and I already have 16 pages of tables.
wow.
They are all, some people would call it a D68, which is rolling a D6 and a D8 and combining the two, which actually gives you 48 entries. So I have like 20 tables of 48 entries each for rooms, hazards, monsters, for the mood of the scene, smells, sounds, and the details that you find, the powers that you create, and everything that you can imagine. Uh, you're covered. I gotcha.
Yeah, you have definitely done a fantastic. That's insane. 20 times 48.
Yeah,
That's 8 960 options.
it gets to a point, Dave, and you think, oh my God, what are 48 different ways to describe a smell? And
Yeah,
you're like, oh my God.
that would take me forever. So, um, let's see. We went over the meta roles.
Yeah, we
We
did.
went over the mechanics a bit. Um, what are spark tags?
Right. So the spark tags, it's the name I gave to the entries on these tables, because there are two kinds of tables mainly in my mind. There are those tables that are very prescriptive. They give you exactly what you find. For example, a random table for treasures in the dungeon, and you roll and it says it's a ruby and 30 gold pieces. This is one way of doing random tables. It's fine. It's excellent. The other way of doing random tables is by giving kind of prompts that don't answer the question for you, but instead they provoke you to come up with your own answer for it. So I try to do a little bit of both in this game. But for example, let's say you're trying to create uh, a hazard for the next room that you're going to try to delve into. Hazards are traps and environmental dangers and perils that you can come across. So you can roll one in a table and just get something clear like corrosive gas. Okay, you add some flavor to it. Okay, there are pipes leaking and everything. That's pretty clear. I have this table, but I also have the opportunity for you to roll an action and a status for that peril. So instead of rolling a corrosive gas, you roll, for example, disorient and dark. So you have those two keywords and you think about for a moment and try to come up with something that those two words inspired you. You don't need to actually implement those two words in the hazard itself, but what does that make you think of? So what is disorient and dark? So the room is completely dark, but there is a source of light on the other side of the room that's blinking, that's flashing super bright every like 3 or 4 seconds. So it's like a lightning that crosses all the room, and every time it flashes, it's so bright that everyone is kind of disoriented. And for the rest, it's completely pitch black. So this is the obstacle you have to face on this room. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
what I call is spark tags. It sparks your imagination to come up with things that only your table will experience. Because I bet if a different person on a different table roll the same two keywords, they'll probably come up with something different. And I think that's the beauty of the spark tags.
that sounds really cool because I automatically had a picture painted in my head of being in a pitch black room, hearing pipes hiss and
Oh,
being disoriented by the hissing pipe. So you're absolutely right that you're going to have two people come up with two totally different scenarios in their head.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, right? I think giving these nudges to creativity is one of the missions of the game designer. Of course, what I found talking to people that play solo RPGs or GMless RPGs is that not everyone is fond of this kind of creativity burden, especially on the spot. And I need to come up with something with just 2 keywords. So I provided some more guided tables as well, if you prefer just going to a straight answer. But on the other hand, there are people that really thrive when given this kind of prompts to just riff off each other and oh, maybe it's that, maybe that. Oh, okay. What about we combine these two ideas? So this experience is very fun on a co-op game.
This sounds very fun. And the other thing I really like is it sounds like with all these tables, the replay value in this game is, no pun intended, off the charts because
Yeah.
it seems like you could play this game 100 times and never have the same situation come up.
Oh, absolutely. Includes the monsters, because instead of having a bestiary that you could eventually run through, I have random monster generator. So you come up with you combine 2 or 3 forms like a lizard and a scorpion, and then 2 or 3 traits like a carapace or lightning bolts. And the next time you play, you never get the same monster again. So yeah, it's the replayability is pretty huge, especially because this game is very focused on its scope. It is not aiming to do everything. It's not a game about sci-fi in general, space exploration and colonization and exploring the galaxy. It's a dungeon delving game. So it knows what it does. And you can, if you want to, just go through some rooms, find some interesting stuff, fight some aliens, and maybe face the terrors of the actions you're doing, that's a game for you. And I hope I can deliver that.
I think you will. Um, I can see people getting stressed out in the best way possible playing this game of like,
Yeah.
and I would actually like to go back to something you had mentioned a little while ago of there are worse things than dying in
Oh
this game.
yeah. So yeah, when I started, I actually talked about it on my newsletter. When I started designing this game, I had to make sure that it would address the potential problematic aspects of dungeon delving and dungeon crawling games in general, because if you go into it without considering what it kind of replicates, you have the tendency, or if not the tendency, at least the risk of reinforcing some stereotypes of oppression and colonization and everything, because it's like pretty much I'm entering your space, I'm killing you, and I'm taking your stuff. So especially coming from Brazil, from a colonized country that suffered stuff similar to that, I thought I should be responsible for addressing these problems. So the first thing I did was making sure to portray humans as going on a diplomatic mission, and the aliens were hostile and they invaded our mission and they killed us. So they started, and we're kind of justifying the way we treat them back, like killing everything that we face. But that was not enough for me. And so what I tried to do now was I tried to embed a mechanic inspired by 316 Carnage Amongst the Stars, which is an awesome game about going on planets and killing aliens. That by the end of the game, you kind of start to realize that that's not a good thing that you're doing. Maybe you're not the good guy. And what I try to do here is embed something similar to that into the wound mechanic. So how does that work briefly? When you get hit, you have like a clock around your facet, which is the attribute, that you mark that many hits there. Those marked hits become your weak spots. So if you roll a die on another test and you roll a number that is crossed with an X, that is a weak spot, you have a choice. You are either taken out or you take a wound. If you take a wound, you paint the number black, so you can never heal from that wound. And what that wound means is actually you got infected with alien DNA. And it spreads. And what it gives you, spoiler alert for people who play the game, it gives you an insight into their hive mind. And you kind of start to see things from their perspective. So this is a table with 18 entries, and you start by rolling a d6. So you only get the 6 first entries on your results. And some of them are actually good. So you're connected to the hive mind, and your senses are enhanced, and you're faster and you're stronger, and say, oh, okay, this alien DNA thing is very cool. But the second time you roll on the table, because you get a wound again, you roll a d8, and then a d10, and then a d12. And every time you roll an entry, you can't roll the entry again. So you go to the entry below that. So that eventually you drive you to the results that are higher than 12. And those results are so crushing because you start to get a perspective that those beings are intelligent, they have a culture, they have a language, and the simple act of the peaceful exploration of humanity going into their ecosystems disrupt their lives in ways that humanity is not even capable of understanding. So we brought destruction and chaos to their lives. That's why they fought back. And then you start to starts down on your character, the horrible things you've been doing, but then it's too late. You're deep into it. And then there are mechanical effects as well. Every time some of them dies, you get hit as well. You start to be connected with them. You start to try to stop your friends and things like that. So instead of dying, you just break your soul and is confronted with the reality of your actions. So that's my little soul-crushing mechanic that I embedded in the game.
I love that because it's so true in so many ways of like, how it was on Earth and how it would be if we were to go out and explore and just be like, oh, we're going to go check out this planet. Like, we don't realize the effect that we could potentially have on a
Yeah,
culture.
even with the purest intentions, which I doubt there would be, but you don't understand them. So yeah, what kind of diseases you bring, what kind of disruptions you cause to that culture that are permanent. And so I think that was a theme I was invested in exploring. So that's why I created this little thing.
Oh, well, it sounds weird, but I can't wait to have my soul crushed playing this game.
Yeah, I think it's a fun part of the game to engage with. Yeah, because it happens gradually, so you get to experience this. Yeah, I'm a space trooper. I kill everything that moves, and gradually evolve into okay. There's more to it.
Sounds very intense.
Yeah.
Now there are other clocks in the game as well. Am I correct?
Yeah, that there are, and there is one specifically that I think we should address here because it blew up on Twitter this past few days. I don't know if you're on Twitter or not. So I was trying to, explain this mechanic on Twitter, and I made a little thread explaining danger clocks. And as we speak, this thread has been seen by more than 95,000 people.
Wow.
And I just have like 2,500 followers on Twitter. So it somehow resonated with people a lot in ways that I wouldn't expect. So much so that the campaign went from 900 euros to 1,800 euros in a couple of days because of this single thread. in which I explained this mechanic. So I think we should talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So yeah, briefly, danger clocks. Danger clocks is how you define your monsters and your hazards. So let's say instead of creating HP or an AC for your monster, you define a die size from D6 to D12. The higher is the die is, the more difficult it is to beat the monster, but also the greater is the reward you get in the end. What you do is you get a clock that goes from 1 to 12, and you write the name of the monster in the middle of it. Let's say Phantom Spider. That's the name of your monster. And you just paint a little box that represents the die size. So let's say it's a D8. It's not a big monster. So you paint the box outside the 8. Okay, this is your monster. Now, every time you cause damage to this monster, the spawner, which is the meta role responsible for taking care of monsters, will mark hits on this clock, as much as the characters do when they get hit. So let's say I fired a weapon and I cause 2 damage. So the spawner goes there to this clock and simply crosses number 1 and number 2. And then he immediately rolls the danger die, which is in this case a D8. He rolls a D8. If by any chance he gets a 1 or a 2, the monster is dead. Headshot, you killed it. If not, the combat continues and you cause more damage. The spawner keeps marking X's on this clock up and rolling the danger die up until it reaches the limit, which is the case is 8, or they roll the number, one of the weak spots on the danger clock. So what it allows is this kind of controlled unpredictability and the opportunity for a huge celebration when you take down an enemy with a single shot, because you can, maybe you cause 1 damage, but then the spawner rolls the danger die and they roll a 1, boom, the monster is dead. And on the other hand, it allows for you to have like a visual progression of the chance you have of defeating the monster. And I shared this and people went crazy with this mechanic, thinking of all the possibilities they could take in the different ways. And one of them that I address in the game is having the same monster with multiple clocks to address like more powerful monsters, or like, let's say you're fighting an alien beetle and they have a D6 carapace of protection. So the beetle is a D10, but first you have to defeat the carapace. It's a danger clock just for this extra armor, so to speak. And it gives this mechanic this chance of rolling a weak spot and taking down an enemy with a single shot. And I think these moments of celebration are beautiful. And I try to design games with moments in mind, you know, and I try to make my rules offer the opportunity for these moments to shine. And danger clocks are all about that.
Yeah, that sounds so freaking cool. So, if you had the beetle like you were just describing with the D6 carapace, and then say a D8 clock for the main beetle, you roll against the carapace and you got the 1. Would that just defeat the carapace?
Yes,
And then
and
you
then you
still got to
can
defeat the beetle
exactly.
itself.
Then you can actually harm the beetle, and it can be used for special powers of the monsters, like in a fantasy setting, like fighting a dragon, and you can somehow disarm the breath fire, or if they have a weapon, you can take down the weapon before you take down the monster. Or if it's a gigantic thing, you can have clocks for their particular limbs and things like that. So it's a very flexible mechanic that I think, looking at the comments I got on those threads, that I just scratched the surface here, and I have seen at least half a dozen people already telling me that they're taking it and putting it on their games and riffing off this idea, which I find exciting. I release all my stuff under Creative Commons, and that's exactly why. And it's worth saying that this mechanics is a variation on a mechanic I found on the SRD of that dungeon game with dragons and stuff. It's different, but the principle is kind of the same. So instead of dice, the monsters have a single stat. It's a D20 roll under system. So if you hit a monster, they have to make a save check with a penalty equal to the amount of damage they accumulated up to this point. So the principle is kind of the same, but I like my implementation of the clock and the concrete feeling that you're creating weak spots that you can exploit on that monster. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that sounds absolutely amazing, Cezar. I love it.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
boy, trying to think. It looks like I've gone through all of my bullet points.
Oh,
Is
excellent.
is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you would still like to discuss about the game?
This game itself, let's see. We talk about the tags with the loop. We covered the loop. We covered the danger check, which is fun. Oh, there is one thing, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely.
Okay, how powers work. I think this one is pretty cool. As I said, when you create your character, you create a power that's kind of flexible. So let's say I want a flamethrower. Okay, so you just write down flamethrower. You don't need to specify what kind of damage it does, the range or anything, because when you're going to use it, you're going to roll your flare die. But instead of a normal check, which is a focus or a frame check that you would want to aim for a 5 or higher, in this one, you have a little table that quickly tells you what number you're aiming for based on the effect you want to achieve. So for example, let's say, oh, I want to get my flamethrower and cause harm to 3 monsters. So that's 3. There are 2 zones away from me. That's 2 more, so that's 5. And the duration is just 1 turn, so that's 6. And I want to cause 2 damage, so that's 8.
Yep.
So 8's the number that you have to roll on the die. Boom. So you have a flexible system. Oh, now I want to cause more localized damage. No, I want to cause more spread out damage. No, I don't want to cause damage. I just want to stun the monster so I get an advantage, what I call a boon die for my next roll. You have all these levers that you can mix and you get this target number that you have to roll. And in case you miss, that would be just, if you just miss and you roll under your target number and you have no choice, I think that would be frustrating. So I embedded a little gamble on the mechanic that you can choose when you miss. You can choose to roll a d6. If you roll a 6, you treat it as a success. If you roll a 1 or 5, you take 2 hits because you forced your power to a point that misfired and you hit yourself.
Oh boy.
So yeah, so those little levers that allow the players to, have like a magnetic plasma sci-fi whatever gadget. Now I want to move one monster to another zone. No, now I want to knock it down. Now I want to cause damage with magnets. Every time you activate this power, you can change it a little bit, and this will give you a target number, and they'll just roll and have fun.
That is so cool. Rather than just a static number
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
have to roll, that it's always variable of what you have to roll depending on.
exactly.
So what are
If you
the
have for a moment, you have like a lot of boon die that you accumulated from the actions of your friends that they can give you a boon die. So you have a nice pool and you say, oh, I have the odds on my favor. So I'm going to aim for a higher target number and cause like 3 damage on 3 monsters at the same time. And you get like a 9 as your target number. You can try because you have the odds on your favor. So it gives more agency to the way you exploit the mechanics, if you know what I mean.
That's so awesome. I love this. Um, can you explain the boon die? I must have missed that when I was reading through the demo.
Right, of course. So when you make an action, you can make an action aiming to defeat threats that you have in front of you, either a monster or a hazard or anything like that. Or you can make actions focusing on creating advantages for you and your fellow players. So let's say, oh, I want to, knock down one steel beam here that will allow you to climb over and have a better shot at a monster that is hidden behind. So you make this check. So instead of causing damage to the enemy, you create a die. And this die, you can keep it for yourself, or you can give it to the next player and see, okay, I created this advantage for you. You can roll both dice and you keep both results for your check. And this is allowed out also in the powers itself. So you can have support powers that give boosts for people to perform other things. And even when you roll very well on a regular check, if you roll the highest number on your die, that means you have an ace. So you get to choose if you cause one harm and create a boon die, or cause two harm, or create two boon die. So you can I punched this guy and I caused one harm, but I also knocked it down. So this means that the next player has an advantage to attack it. So I give a boon die to him or to her, and they get to roll with a better chance of hitting them. So yeah, that the boon dice are an integral part of this dynamic of the table. If you're playing by yourself, of course, all the boon die that you create, you keep it for yourself, but they work exactly the same way. You create advantages for you to take opportunity of later on.
So cool. I'm gonna be trying to get so many people hooked on this game because this
Appreciate
sounds
that.
this sounds so amazingly fun, and I love the the randomness of the
Yeah.
game. It is just so fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, that was
I'm really
everything.
enjoying it.
Yeah, and I love how you can hear your passion for this game when you describe it, and you can see how physical you get when you're describing it. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
So that was all I had.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to bring up that I might not have touched on?
I don't think so. Other than saying that the game is pretty much ready, I'm staring at it right now. I finished the tables. The game is currently sitting at 66 pages, so I aimed for a zine and I'll end up delivering a small book. But that's because I couldn't stop creating those random tables. They're just too much fun. And I inserted some examples of play because since some of the mechanics are a little unorthodox and not everyone will have the chance to have a talk with me like you're having now, I thought it would be beneficial to include some examples of play. But I promise the game is clear, concise, straight to the point, and will be delivered in a week or so. People will get the PDF fully bookmarked. All my games are hyperlinked to the max. You can navigate from one point to the other, clicking on stuff, and also a coupon for an optional purchase of the print-on-demand book on Lulu, because I like the quality and the back end of them is much better than DriveThru RPG. So you can get the PDF or you can just use it, or if you want to print the book, I think it's going to be like an extra $6 plus shipping, if I'm not mistaken, unless I keep putting pages on this game. Yeah, I think it's sitting at $6 because I don't profit from the printed copies. I just offer them as a compliment, as a thank you for people that are backing the game, because I actually profit from the PDF.
That is so awesome. And
Thank
folks,
you.
if you haven't backed this and you're watching this, click on the crowdfunder link below and back this project. And Cesar, I had so much fun talking to you.
Yeah, me too. It was a pleasure.
And for anyone watching that hasn't backed it, go back it. I'm going to say it one more time. And if you enjoyed this interview, give it a thumbs up and maybe subscribe to the channel. That would be awesome. Other than that, have a great day, folks, and happy gaming.